Welcome to the Morrison Report. Hosted by Deval Morrison, sales representative for Bosley Real Estate Limited Brokerage. Ms. Morrison has co-authored the best-selling book, Success Today, with Brian Tracy, and has been interviewed on NBC, ABC, and CBS affiliates by Bob Guinea from The Bachelor. Deval, a real estate investor, has spoken to many attendees at her real estate seminars and is currently ranked in the top 5% of agents in her brokerage. Join me in welcoming your host, Deval Morrison.
Welcome to the Morrison Report. I wanted to create a podcast that would give people insights into the Toronto real estate market. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Deval Morrison or like my business page on Facebook. Thank you so much for joining us today, Alan. We've got Alan Carson. He is the owner and president of Carson Dunlop Home Inspection. And can you tell us a little bit about your company, Alan, and how long has your company been around, and what do you do?
Absolutely. We started our home inspection business in 1978 when nobody else was really doing it in Toronto. My partner and I had been working in the building inspection business on the commercial side, working on the insurance side of things, and we realized that when people were buying homes, they didn't really have any protection, and nobody was doing anything to help them make this very important decision. And so we looked around and found that people had been doing it in Great Britain for a couple of hundred years, of course. It was just getting started along the eastern seaboard in the U.S., and so we decided to start out on our own. And we figured out that this wasn't going to be a sales and marketing problem. This was going to be an education problem. And so we had to introduce the service to people in Toronto. And the approach that we took was saying, if you were going to buy a used car, would you take it to your mechanic and get it checked out? And, of course, people say yes. And we said, well, doesn't it make sense to do the same thing with the resale home? And that message kind of clicked, and so we kind of got started then, and we've built on that basis.
Perfect. That sounds great. Now, I notice now with condominiums, it seems like it might be prudent to start getting home inspections for some of the condo buildings because some of the condo buildings have been around for a while. Why do you think that condo buyers should consider getting home inspections? And do you think all condo buyers should do it, or only if there's certain elements within the condo do you think that people should do it?
Well, I'm going to start by saying that I think most people do not really understand the complexity of condominiums. And so many of our clients don't understand what components in the condominium they're responsible for. Everyone kind of has a vague sense of what the unit is and what the common elements are. But here's an example of something that most people don't understand. The heating and cooling systems in the unit can be all over the map. And by that I mean sometimes the individual unit owner owns and is responsible for the heating and cooling equipment. Sometimes it's part of the common element, and sometimes it's a bit of a blend where the individual unit owner is responsible for the maintenance but not the replacement. These are pretty important things to know because replacing the heating and cooling system in a condo unit can be $5,000 to $10,000. And we have so many clients who are first-time buyers who work really hard to be able to get into the condo in the first place. And that kind of significant expense in the first year or two can be a pretty significant hardship.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's an interesting thing. And I think condos are in some ways much more fragile than people assume them to be.
Mm-hmm. Now, it's funny. When I look at some condos that they have the furnace in them or they have the HVAC system in them, and certainly when I see things like that, I do start to suggest to my clients that it might be wise to consider getting a home inspection done on their condo when they see those elements in the condo. Do you think that those elements are better in condos, worse in condos? Like, is it a good idea to buy a condo that's got a furnace in it? Do you think that people should perhaps consider condos that don't have furnaces or hot water tanks in them? What are your thoughts about those things?
Well, I wouldn't make my decision to buy a condo based on that. You need location is so important, and the building and whether it fits your lifestyle, and all of those issues are sort of the leading things in choosing it. So I'm going to say that it probably makes more sense to make sure you're making an informed decision rather than to avoid one because of the type of heating or cooling system. So that's where I think an inspection can really help, as long as you know what you're getting into and you know what you're responsible for. So if you say, I don't have to worry about replacing the heating and cooling, that's great. If you do, and then it becomes important to know how old it is, how well it's been maintained, when it might have to be replaced. So if need be, you can put the money aside for that. So if it's the perfect condo for you, I think you just need to move forward with the knowledge of what you're getting into.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. Now, on a home inspection for a condo, would you ever inspect the other areas of the condo building that fall, let's say, outside of the specific condo, like a parking garage or anything else?
Well, that's a great question, and we actually have two inspection companies. Carson Dunlop is the home and condo unit inspection company, and CDW Engineering is our sister company, and they do commercial building inspections, including all those common elements. So absolutely, should the common elements in a condo be inspected? They absolutely should, and on a regular basis. But those are done by specialty engineering companies and are typically part of a reserve fund study that the condo corporation does. So when you're buying a condo, you want to pay attention to what's called the status certificate.
Right.
And you should be looking at information on those common elements. Is there enough money in the reserve fund? Are there budgeted repairs for big things? Is there going to be enough money to pay for those down the road? So that kind of service is one that we perform, but not usually for an individual unit buyer, but for the condominium corporation or condominium association, if that makes sense.
Sure. No, that definitely makes sense. One of the things that seems to be coming up more and more for condos is KaiTech Plumbing. That I've certainly seen quite a few condo buildings. They find they've got KaiTech Plumbing, then they have to rip it out, so there's a special assessment on the unit owners to rip out all of the current plumbing and put in new plumbing. Can you tell us a little bit about what is KaiTech and why are there so many concerns around that?
Well, that's a fascinating question, and let me give you a sort of 30-second overview on KaiTech. So KaiTech is the brand name of a kind of plumbing, and it's a plastic plumbing, and the fancy name for it is PEX, which stands for cross-linked polyethylene. So it's plastic tubing, if you will, and it was used like so many building materials because it was faster, easier, and less expensive to install than copper piping, which people had used for a long, long time. And in some cases, this plastic piping has failed, and when piping fails that's carrying water, you're going to get leakage and you're going to get water damage. It was used it was first introduced in 1995. They stopped manufacturing it in 2007, although we've seen some condos with it built up until about 2010, just because the material was still in warehouses and so on. We have not seen a ton of problems with it in Toronto. We have seen a few, but a much smaller percentage than in some other areas. And there is a class action lawsuit both in Canada and the U.S., and although there are some settlement funds set aside and you can still register up until 2020, so you've got a few years left, it's not clear how much money is going to be left at the end of the day for all the people who may have registered. So whether that's a great insurance program or not, I'm not sure.
Got it. That makes sense.
Yeah. It's funny because in most cases it's not the piping that has failed, it's the brass fittings. And that brass is an alloy of copper and zinc. And a lot of the reports that we read talk about a failure of the brass fitting because they use too much zinc in it. And like building anything, with two materials, copper is the expensive material and zinc is the inexpensive material, so people have a tendency to put more of the cheap stuff in. And that has led to some failures across North America, although, again, we have seen so little of that here in Toronto. I'm tempted to say it's negligible.
Wow.
So we have seen some failures of the piping in very specific situations where water temperatures and pressures are high and the water is flowing through the pipes 24/7. But, yeah, we've been watching the situation closely since about 2011 when it first became an issue. And we understand people are very nervous and concerned about it, but from a percentage of total amount of KaiTech installed, we're seeing very, very few failures so far, and nobody just knows what the future is going to hold on that.
Right. Interesting. I mean, yeah, because I did have, I had heard of someone who had a hard time getting insurance on it was a stacked townhouse complex, and they were having a hard time getting insurance because once the insurer found out that there was KaiTech, they didn't want to insure them. And the ironic part of the story was it happened to be the same company that was insuring the complex. So I think sometimes the insurance companies don't even know.
Well, I think you're absolutely right about that. And I don't think insurance companies have really thought it through. And in some cases, they're paying attention to the media and are kind of reacting. We, again, work with an insurance company that has a pretty good comfort level with it. And I know of one of the major insurance companies who used to say no, but have changed their position to say, we're not going to deny coverage for properties with KaiTech piping, because they've been paying attention and have seen so few failures. And it's important to understand that if you have copper piping in your building, might you have a leak and might you have failures? Oh, absolutely. So there's nothing that's bulletproof.
Right.
And I do find that human nature tends to be one of very strong overreaction when we hear bad news. So I would say the jury, quite frankly, is still out on KaiTech piping. Some insurance companies have made their decision, but others have said it's okay. So when people have problems, we would encourage them to touch base with us and see if we can help them with that.
Interesting. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think the challenge, though, is that if someone's purchasing a condo where there are, either they know there's KaiTech or they don't know yet that there's KaiTech, I think the challenge is that a lot of these condos are being served with special assessments to rip out the KaiTech. And obviously the special assessment depends on the size of the unit, but they're being asked for an additional $4,000 to $8,000, and because that's not chump change, people get a little bit concerned.
Absolutely, and I understand, and I do think it does create a hardship on people, and I wonder if when buildings are making this decision based on being proactive and conservative, I, in one sense, applaud them for being cautious. In another sense, I just hope they're not spending a lot of money unnecessarily on preventative measures. And again, it's just so difficult to know at this point.
Now, what other things could go wrong in a condo, which would be the reason to get a home inspection, things that you need to find out about other than KaiTech or anything else like that?
There are so many things, and as I mentioned, condos are far more complex than people sometimes understand. The exterior cladding of these buildings, so leakage around sliding glass doors, leaking at windows is a significant issue. Appliances in condos, it's what we call a vertical community, and so water being the number one enemy of every home, water issues are so significant, and leaking dishwashers are perhaps the most obvious example, and you can do damage not only to your unit but to the units below and create quite an expensive obligation for the unit owner. And we do, by the way, encourage people to pay a lot of attention to the insurance that they have, because again, you're not just responsible for damage to your unit, but damage that you might cause to people below you in the event of a water leak. And Murphy's Law is that whenever a pipe bursts or whenever there's a significant leak, it's when you're not at home, and things can build up pretty quickly in terms of damage. So we worry about that. We pay a lot of attention to that. We look at the appliances and so on. We also find significant issues with the heating and cooling systems being neglected and mold issues in there. We find a lot of clothes dryers with venting systems that are not clean. And it sounds like a trivial problem until you realize that it's a fire hazard.
Wow.
And a lot of appliances have a clean out for the lint that everyone's used to who has lived in a house. But people who haven't lived in a condo are often not familiar with the fact that there is typically a long vent run, and there is usually a secondary clean out in the vent system to remove lint. And we regularly open these, and the lint just has completely clogged the thing and shut it down. So not only does the dryer not work very well, it takes forever to dry your clothes, but this can build up heat and, as I say, be a fire hazard. So those are some of the things that are a little different. How you turn off the water in a condo, especially older condo buildings, is not very intuitive. And again, if you have that emergency, if you can catch it quickly and shut the water off, that's great. A lot of people don't realize that there are special key-operated systems to turn the water off in a lot of condos, And so it's part of our process of doing a condo inspection is helping people understand how to look after the buildings, maintain them to protect themselves and protect against water, against fire hazards, against damage to their units and the units below. I think it's pretty